Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Barry Nicholsberg. I'm Chief Development Officer for Estate and Gift Planning at the Carter Center, located in Atlanta. If you are new to the Carter Center, if this is your first experience with us, I simply ask if you would please go to our website, just see who we are. It's cartercenter.org. That's it. If you've been with us before, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate your support. And most of all, whether you've been with us before or not, thank you for trusting us enough to tune in for this hour. We really, really do appreciate it. Joining me today is Mark Williams. He's a Senior Associate Director in this same office, Estate and Gift Planning. He happens to also be a Trust and Estates attorney. And Natasha Roberts is our Assistant Director in the office, pretty much holds everything together. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Mark Williams, who will give a standard disclaimer and introduce Amy and Joel. Mark?
Thank you, Barry. Well, so I know this is a terrible thing to have roll upon your screen here, but I have good news for you. I don't have to read the disclaimer. I'll just tell you quickly that I won't be giving any legal advice today. In fact, we're very fortunate because the subject that we're talking about today is not so much about legal and technical planning. This is an important subject, and honestly, as Barry and I first began our research into the subject, we noticed that there are just simply too few resources that are out there focused on preparing heirs, preparing families, equipping them. And so given the potential that there is for inherited resources to be used for good or simply to even be just wasted without any impact, we really wanted to focus on this crucial subject and bring some folks on who could talk to us, because ultimately we really want families to be empowered to pass and give not only their resources and inheritance, if you will, but also to really have a sense of family and purpose that they will use to sustain those members for generations. And so I'm very pleased to introduce today our guests, Amy Castoro and Joel Kimmel with the Williams Group. I will say quickly, no relation on that, but before you see just an extremely abbreviated bio for Amy. Amy, thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, this wealth of knowledge and experience that you're sharing with us is something that we've been very excited to go forward and share with folks. I'd like to also point out that there is a really excellent additional book that Amy has co-authored here called Bridging Generations. If you all get a chance to follow up on that afterwards, be a wonderful read. Thank you, Amy, so much. And Joel, I'd like to also take a moment to thank you for being with us today. For those of you out there who are looking at this slide and seeing, we've got two wonderful authors with great perspectives there. But Joel has also been working with the Williams Group for 20 years. So we've got, between Amy and Joel, more than 30 years of experience here to talk to you about this really, really important subject matter. This is just, for me, I'll say too, before we get started today, as a person who has been an estate planning attorney, worked in trust and estates and a tax-focused practice, part of what it is that you all are doing out there is incredibly important work to help that process along. So thank you both. And without further ado, I'd ask you both, since I had to just do a quick bio and introduction, if you could tell us a little bit about how you both came to be focused on this really important subject of working with families and their heirs to prepare them for the future.
I can kick us off on that, Mark. So I've been with the Williams Group for 10 years, and I had the amazing good fortune of, while I was getting a certification in coaching, met one of Roy Williams' original coaches. I can still remember where I was sitting and what I was doing when I heard him say what he did for a living. And literally my world stopped, because I could see it was just a magnificent next step for my background, which was organizational psychology, was Disney, was consulting, but all around businesses and building high-performing teams. So to be able to do that with families in a way that enables them to stay together and strengthen their legacy and their philanthropy, I didn't believe it even existed. I went out and met Roy Williams within a week, and boy, just what an amazing man. And I knew instantly that that's how that was going to go. And I haven't looked back since. I'm one of those lucky people that gets to say I do what I love. And then, of course, meeting Joel Kimmel changed my world as well. So, Joel, you want to say a little bit about how you got introduced to Roy?
Well, it was sort of the same trajectory of the blind date. Roy, as a person who referred, I was doing another project, and this person said, well, you should meet Roy Williams. And I met Roy Williams, and he said, how old are you, Joel? And I told him, I told him my age, and he says, perfect age. And I was like 60 or something like that. And it says, little maturity makes a difference in these family meetings. And I just fell in love like Amy did with Roy. He was a genius, seeing what really the breakdowns are with most families and building trust and really how to have interpersonal and effective interactions with each other. I grew up in a great family. My mom never said a negative thing that I ever remember her saying to anyone ever. So that was great. And my dad always had me honor the other person for who they were in the moment, not what they've done or where they were going. So it's always been important to me. I've been fortunate enough to carry this commitment to family pretty much through my whole career. I think the core of having families being able to engage with each other and really design on the fly and what works for everybody has been really a powerful contribution to so many people's lives. And being on this conversation with you, Mark, and the other guests that are on it is really an honor for me to be able to share this with you. So thank you for asking us.
We are incredibly thrilled. And Joel, what a wonderful segue into this discussion as we sort of talk about the need to focus on planning and maybe sort of different ways, especially as we sort of look at this idea that there is this really uniform and consistent problem out there. It was one of the things that really stood with us and made the most impact on us, this realization that 70% of family plans, their estate plans and wealth plans are failing. And this is well documented by two incredibly well-known and respected research organizations. So I wonder if you might talk with us a little bit first about that statistic, and then help us kind of understand a little bit about what is a successful versus an unsuccessful transfer for families.
But Amy, do you want to?
Yeah, so I can share a bit more about that. That statistic of 70% is actually a conservative number. There are some other people in our space like Jay Hughes who are researchers. They would put that number closer to 80 or 85%. So even if we say it's 3 in 10, it's too many. It's too many. 7 families not making the transition successfully. It's also a global phenomenon. It's not just here. In Italy, they call it from the stables to the stars to the stables again. In the US, it's short sleeves to short sleeves. In China, it's teacup to teacup. So it truly is a global phenomenon. We suspect, as do many, that the reason for that statistic not really shifting much is people almost have the accent on the wrong syllable, right? They think that if they put all of their time and attention on building a great estate plan, everything else will fall into place. So they've been trained to think about preservation and taxation and growth. But really all of that has to sit on a strong foundation of relationships. And so unless they're paying attention to that, they're only really managing half of the conversation. A successful transfer is really quite simply when the family stays intact, relationships stay intact, and they maintain control of their assets. One has to do with the other. If they fall out of relationship, they can end up in litigation, which very often is the case. The real cost of that is really not the assets, but it's the generations to come that won't have an opportunity to really get to know each other.
Thank you, Amy. You're right. I think to focus on the future generations there and the cost borne by them as a result of this. Certainly, I'll add just in terms of background, I've seen too many plans go sideways that were all done well with technical planning and the legal planning, the financial and accounting side. So this is actually a wonderful segue into this next question that I had hoped to talk with you about. And that is traditional planning really an impediment or something that's causing these failed transitions?
Yeah, I think it's not causing it, but it's not answering the whole question. So we can look in the media, I'd say twice a month, there's a high profile person who can afford the top estate planning professionals in the world. And yet they find themselves in litigation. And I'm not saying it's not because they're not doing a great job. I think it's because they're not preparing the matriarch and the patriarch to start looking at, okay, for whom is this estate? And now that we've prepared the assets, how do we prepare the family for the assets? So I think that if they were to focus on a broader level of service, then I think they could make a big difference in those statistics.
Fantastic. And Joel, I'd wonder if I could get your comments, your thoughts about how traditional planning may be playing a role in this process, if you see it differently or if you see anything else that might be worth noting.
Well, I can't point my one finger at that as a significant cause. I think it's a both and, as Amy was talking about it. And if people can't communicate or share their ideas within the family and with the advisors, there's a little chance of having something fall into alignment for the family in a way that will forward their vision of being a united family. We've done work with advisors who are very successful advisors and all that. And when we start to talk about building trust and relationship and asking the right questions, that builds new possibilities rather than a yes or no. All of a sudden, the texture of the family's interactions and their vision for themselves to actually design something that they can all see being part of starts to shift. So I think the other aspect of that is, I think the way our world is existing presently, in the old days, people would, to call the Williams Group, someone would have like a patriarch or matriarch would have a significant problem, a health situation, a heart attack, illness or something like that before it called the urgency of getting this organized. But I think out of the family offices and the works like you do, it's starting to be seen as something that's important to do and do it now rather than later. So I think it's also calling the advisors on to start stepping up to a new interpretation of the possibilities that they offer their clients as well.
Mark, I want to say one more thing there. Estate plans are designed to take care of assets. They're not designed to take care of relationships.
That's a great point to reinforce here, and one that I'll say in my time in practice, honestly, I viewed my role as being there to figure out how to lock up as many assets as possible for as many generations as possible with as little tax and sort of legal recourse as possible against those things. And I felt great at the end of the day if I did that job, but I realized that I'm really missing a great deal of information, a great deal of substance to a conversation. It's been one of the blessings of being at the Carter Center. But this brings me to another question, that as people get so focused on some of these areas, is there really enough attention paid or focus paid in terms of planning to what's going to happen to these heirs, either the benefits, the responsibilities, both, that they're going to be dealing with as they step into that next phase of their lives?
There really isn't. RBC did a study where they looked at the number of people who were pretty convinced that their next generation was not prepared, and that was more than half of the people they surveyed. It was close to 60%. And then they looked at how many of them were taking steps to actually start preparing the next generation, and that was maybe 10%. So what that tells us is it's a little like Roy Williams used to talk about it like a football team. You would have the offensive line where you had the accountants and you had the estate attorneys and you had the financial advisors, and this whole frontline team knew what everybody else's job was, and they worked pretty well together as a team. Then the day comes where the estate does actually, or call it the ball, pass to the heirs. 9 out of 10 times the heirs have never seen an estate plan. They don't know what it is, and yet they're the ones expected to catch it. The trouble is that they have to catch it while they're playing against the Bernie Madoffs of the world, a well-meaning member of the church, someone they went to school with. And they're just not equipped to not only not know how to make a good decision or hire a good advisor, they don't know what's expected of them. We worked with a family where there was a father who had 2 sons. The great grandfather actually put a bunch of funds into penny stocks. That grew over many years. It passed down through the generations. Unfortunately, the dad had a sudden heart attack. The money then fell to the 2 sons. One of the sons said, hey, this is at an all-time high. We can pay for our kids' education. We can really take care of ourselves and pay off the houses. And the other son said, boy, not on my watch. I'm not going to see that money go out of the family. And so it took 12 years of litigation. And unfortunately, that wealth was dissipated as a result. Worse, the 2 sons, who were very good friends, weren't speaking to each other. So if mom and dad had sat them down and said, sell it when it reaches this price, 7 words, they would all be in alignment, or at least have more input on how that should unfold. So clearly there is not enough focus on the impact. Joel, was there something you wanted to add there? Maybe you have a story of an unprepared heir that comes into wealth that they didn't know about?
Well, I'm sorting through all the stories.
Yeah, I know. I know there's too many.
Think of. Well, it was interesting. There was this family had 2 sons that were it was a very disjointed family, and one of the sons they thought was not mentally stable and all of that. And in one of our meetings, we discovered he just likes to think about what he's going to say. He's fine inside, you know. And then his dad wondered about his ability to manage money. And I asked the son, I said, so what's your interpretation of being responsible about money and wealth and resources? And he says, well, when I was 10 years, much younger, when Apple stock fell to its lowest thing, I bought all the money I had, and he's worth over $4 million. And his dad didn't even know it because he was waiting for the big hit, or his son, to find that out. So, you know, so now he also found out his other brother, his other son, has about $2.5 or $3 million that they did all by themselves in the background while the father was worrying about if they're ever going to figure it out. So interesting if they get to talk how things start to take off and turn around.
Well, and it's funny too, that seems to really suggest that there is a real lack of attention paid to what's going on with heirs there, whether or not they're even preparing themselves. These conversations really do need to happen. So thank you so much for illustrating that. And as we move on, I really wanted to take time. Thank you all for, by the way, producing this graphic, because I think it does a world of good, right? The picture is worth 1,000 words. As we look at this, these reasons for unsuccessful family transfers really don't seem to be revolving around these technical, legal, financial, accounting issues. If I may, they seem to be much more revolving around sort of the interpersonal or the family aspects that are going on. And so I'd like to ask you guys, really, you know, what effect does the family dynamic have on the failure or success of one of the family's transition plans?
Well, that pie chart, if you could flip back there a little bit, Mark, that would be helpful. So more than half the time, right? If we look at the 70% failure rate, 60% of that 70% failure is due to trust and communication. Inside of that part of the pie chart is the question, how much do we give them and when? That's not really a question about age. That's really a question about competence. It's a question about trust. So really the question should be, who are they becoming? And how do we have a conversation about expectations? How do we invite the next generation to be a contribution to the wealth? So that really is in the center of the game. Whether you have a family or a family business, or you've sold all the wealth, this piece of trust and communication is vital. This is also where we call cordial hypocrisy lives. This is where the next generation is smiling on the outside because it's not safe to say anything other than yes, sir. And so what we find is the trust and communication goes both ways. The next generation, the lower generation to the top generation, the top generation down. The 25% failure to prepare heirs, many people look at that and say, boy, let's just put them in a boot camp and they'll figure it out, right? So there again, we have our attention on the wrong syllable. We're focusing on assets, where this is really where Joel shines with all of our families. The conversation is really about who are they becoming. Roy Williams used to have a phrase that we all love. He said, the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. So very often our work is helping the next generation to figure out their path. Who are they inside of this massive umbrella of wealth, and how do they find where they can shine? And then sorry.
No, I was gonna say that's fabulous. I really appreciate that that description of it, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, just the last 10% is that they don't have that family mission, sort of like that family I mentioned earlier. The mistake a lot of people make is they say, oh, let's just get a family wealth mission statement. Sometimes their financial advisor hands it to them. And so we find that the trust and communication piece really has to be dealt with first, and then we can get to the mission statement. But if we just start with the mission statement, we just have more cordial hypocrisy. And the 5%, all other is just strange things like a pandemic that can wipe out a business, or poor management, or the rare occasion that there's not such great advice. Joel, was there anything you wanted to add to this one?
Joel, I might actually ask, I know I noted in your bio, and not sort of enough as we came in, that you have a military background. Thank you very much for your service to our country, and certainly now, as I ask you to call upon that service and your experience in working perhaps with other families who have served, can you talk about what impact that may have on a family dynamic? Because I suspect there may be issues of family identity that are tied up in that. I suspect that there may be expectations that are sort of there on the behalf of whoever it was that was serving, and perhaps even upon some of the children or heirs who will be raised in those environments. Would you mind speaking to this idea, this discussion about family dynamics?
Yeah, with regards to the families I've worked with that have served in our country, in the military or in another part of the government, but served with a commitment to maintain the democracy that we live in. I think the families, one of the things when soldiers come back from serving, what they want their families to know is that they did it on behalf of themselves and the family. And mostly the family winds up asking them, why did you do it? Rather than saying, so what contribution do you see that you can bring to the family now? And when you start to ask that type of questions, then all of a sudden they see the contribution the person or the son or the daughter made to the family. My dad was in the RCAF in World War II, Canadian Air Force. Then he got brought back to the United States Air Force. I was in Vietnam. My younger brother was in Thailand. And my daughters, this moves me to tears. Every time we get to talk about being a family, there's something comes up about the honor it is to be a daughter or a wife of someone who served. And I think in the job of an advisor and in the job of people that work with families with military or diplomats, to that point, is to really ask them, what kind of contribution do you see your service can make to us? And then have that built into the fabric of it. It's pretty inspiring. I've been with families that the kids, as part of being a part of that family, go serve in the military for 2 years minimum, and then come back and bring what you've learned. Because most of them went into high tech or pilots. So I think it's a healthy event. I don't think war is a smart event, but I do think serving our country is a smart, healthy event for a family.
Joel, thank you so much. That's exactly what I had hoped. I have a number of folks in my family who are current Navy and former Navy, a few folks in Army who are very, very close to me. And I know that these things play an important role in the lives of those families. And so I really appreciate you sharing how that has been sort of revealed through your experience. And as we've gone on and we've talked about some of these additional issues, you know, this trust and communication breakdown being the most massive single failure, I wonder if you guys have any additional commentary about what that looks like, you know, as these families get into their planning. How does a trust and communication breakdown reveal itself to the family members? I'm sure it's got to be different because they're all individuals, but if you have some insights you could share with us, that would be wonderful.
Now there's a million of these stories, but give them the best we got.
You know, I can think of one offhand that I think is great, a great demonstration of this. We worked with a family where there were 3 siblings. They were 2 of them were married, and the youngest son, I'll put him at about 26-ish. He started to not be as responsive as he had been. Like he over the last couple of years wasn't returning phone calls or wasn't responding in text very quickly. And then we had a family meeting and he didn't show up for the first day of the family meeting. And that was sort of a big red flag. And so we got a hold of him and said, hey, what's going on? And he said, yeah, I just don't think it makes sense for me to come because every time I come and I have something to say, somebody shoots it down. So he was not trusting that anytime he came up with an idea of what he could do with his life, that anybody would take him seriously. So that was really a function of trust and communication breakdowns. During the meeting, we had him talk about what is it that gets him out of bed in the morning? What does he see as an interesting place in the world to participate in? And if he could change one thing about the world, what would it be? So he had a lot of great things to say, but it wasn't until he stood up in front of everybody and said, guys, the reason I'm not launched, one reason I'm not launched is because every time I come up with an idea, you tell me why it's not going to work. So at the end of the meeting, the spouse of one of his siblings said, hey, I'm in the construction business. How about we start looking at some real estate possibilities? And they did, and it worked out really well. And today he's very successful and his dad's actually doing investment with him. But that's pretty classic. And, you know, if you met this family, you'd say, great family, just magnificent. But just under the surface, there are these little stress fractures happening that we write about actually pretty often. And being able to engage those directly is really what we do.
Angie,
Oh, please.
Yeah, just the bottom one here on the screen, breakdown of trust and communication can set the heirs up for failure. Absolutely. I think one of the biggest shifts we see that has families starts to discover they can talk about trust is when we talk about the 4 domains of trust. Rather, because when someone says, I don't trust you, or a parent says that to their kid, their child, the child's identity in their own sense is trashed. So what do I do now that you don't trust me? And so we teach the 4 domains of trust. One is a person's ability to be competent. And so you have to have competencies to have trust, do trust in the work that you'll be doing. Sincerity, that you care that you're doing the work and it means something to you. And the third one is reliability, about you do what you say you're going to do. And then the fourth one is that you care, an umbrella of that I care about all of this. So when a parent or a son or a daughter or whoever it is in the family says, I don't trust you, rather than losing your identity, you can say, well, which domain don't you trust me in? Reliability or sincerity or competency? Well, reliability, you're always late to the meetings. Well, good. Well, let's talk about that. And then we can set up a game to get me to the meetings on time. But the beauty of this whole distinction about trust, the 4 domains of trust, is that the relationship stays intact. So you're not starting from -10. You say, oh, no, just get to the meeting on time. How can I support you to do that? And so that is so profound shift in families. Just doing that starts to open up as Amy says, it starts to take away the hypocrisy, and it starts to open up on honest and really sincere conversations for possibilities.
I'm extremely grateful for you to bringing that information out, because I truly believe that as you start looking through this, that probably in most of these cases, you've got folks, either the parents or the heirs, who are extremely optimistic about the possibilities of the future, and they want to deliver. They make these commitments and these agreements, not so much out of trying to deceive parents or, uh, it's an overzealousness, perhaps. Does that sound right to you all? People really want to do this and they get invested, but maybe they're just not prepared. Does that sound right to you? Your discussions with folks out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that all the time. Everybody is well intended. It's just that they may not have the skill to navigate this space. And so that's why there are organizations like ours to help. But I think they are well intended. Internally, that's what they'd like to have happen, but externally, the actions fall short. And, if I could get on a soapbox and wave a flag, it's start these conversations early, get moving, rather than just have it a conversation in your head. Figure out what's a way I can get going on this, and find a way to start the conversations.
I was just with a family just beginning of this week. One child will be 7, one child will be 10, and one child will be 13, 2 girls and a boy. And all of a sudden we started talking about, so what is it to be this family? And what part of it do you think is most important to take care of? And they all had great answers. I would talk to Amy about it, and I was blown out. These kids were so smart and so excited about it that I was taking notes. So sorry, right questions. And we if I can go on my soapbox.
Yeah.
I think there's a situation that when people interact with each other, especially in families, there's a tendency to ask another person, well, what do you think we should do about X? And so most of the time when you ask a thinking question, this is one type that we spend most of our time asking, a thinking question, the answer, their awareness goes into the past and they're looking over what they did in the past and they sort of bring it out and say, all right, how about this? And hoping it'll last more than 20 minutes. So another type of question we ask, and we ask it quite frequently in our family meetings, is vision questions. So Johnny, what would it look like to have this to fall into place for you in a way that'll contribute to the family? A different question, but it gives Johnny the opportunity or Janet the opportunity to look out into the future and see honestly for themselves what they can see would fit for the family. And then you're talking about visions rather than IQs and thoughts. So the vision question is very powerful to allow to experience the trust in the family and open up new possibilities. If parents just ask the kids, well, what would it look like to have this happen for you, Janet? And how do you see this unfolding? There's a different world in that family's relationship because they can trust each other to use that.
And that sounds like it also gets at this idea about heir preparation or total family preparation, and one of the things I'd like to sort of reemphasize as we go back, thinking to the pie chart you guys shared, is that's an 85%, maybe even plus number that accounts for all of these failures. It's almost like a feedback loop. Do you all see any interactions with that communication breakdown and this inability or failure to prepare heirs in the proper way? Are there ways people can try to address that?
Great question. And yes, the lines between them are very thin, right? If we're asking how much should we give them and when, and we're not really trusting that they'll be able to be responsible for it, what does responsible look like? And that's really an heir prepared question. So I would start with that. So here's my expectation. What does prepared look like to you? What do you see you could be doing now to get ahead of this? We interview a lot of these next geners, and a question I usually ask is, what's your guess on the size of the net worth of the family here? They're usually pretty close. They're pretty good at figuring things out through the internet. And I'm always kind of shocked that how close they actually are. And mom and dad always say, well, they don't know, but they can figure out Zillow, they can figure out the cost of flights and vacations and things like that. So I would say asking them, what does prepared look like? And who do you see yourself being in this family? And if you could be a contribution to this wealth meaning not just money, but the identity of the family, our education, our networks, what would that look like? Sometimes the next generation, they grow up inside of such tremendous affluence that they really don't know where to start, right? They're not even comfortable being wealthy, and they're taking that lead from their parents. So a good conversation about how do we be wealthy and feel good about it, right? So that's kind of an interesting conversation to have with families. I had one dad of 8 kids who came from really meager beginnings say, I can give my kids anything, but I can't give them desperation. And so talking to the kids about what does it look like to be excited about getting out of bed in the morning for you, and follow that pony in the direction it's headed, because there's no telling what will come from that. We've seen next geners come to these meetings with long hair and barely making eye contact. And by the end of the process, they're leading the family foundation, and they're doing incredible things for local community causes. One in particular, I'm thinking of a spouse who was a fireman, and he had stepped into a wealthy family, really didn't know where to find his place. The conversation turned to giving, and he said, boy, I've been buying used equipment for the soccer team down the block. I'd love to be able to do more. Dad said, I'll match it. And it's still going on today. I know Joel worked with a family where they invited the younger kids into this conversation, and the results were astounding. Joel, can you say more about that one?
Yeah, there was a family that I was working with, and parents thought it would be fun to take the kids on a safari. And the girls were, they had 2 daughters, and the girls were young, maybe 10 and 11, not very old. So they went to Africa when they were around the campfire, and the parents had told us they'd never talked to the girls about the wealth and the philanthropy, et cetera, like that. And they were sitting around the fireplace, the fire at the last night there. And one of the girls said, you know, Dad, you know what I'd like to do is I'd like to start a fund, a bake sale at our school that we raise money and take care of these old elephants that don't have a place to live. And the younger daughter says, I'd like to do that as well. And I want to buy books for kids that come to school because they don't have any. And the parents never said it. They get back to their hometown. The kids start the bake sale at their school. They raised a bunch of money, and it's still going. And it's probably 10 or 12 years since that has happened. But I think the whole thing about responsibility of the resources, I think I like to call it the resources that wealth gives you, and the purpose of and use of the resources starts to create a bigger possibility for younger generations to see that.
And the consequence, Mark, of an unprepared heir is that, you know, they say in the estate plans that they can start receiving this wealth at 30 or 35 or 40. We have clients in their 60s and 70s that self-declare they're not ready. And so it's a burden for them, and they feel irresponsible, which adds to more shame, which makes it very difficult for them to feel good. We also see the suicide rates in Silicon Valley going very high because many of these young people are coming into great wealth, and they don't know how to find their purpose in it. So the consequences of an inadequately prepared heir are grave. And
go ahead, please.
I will say unfair, that the responsibility, I remember speaking with another client of ours, he said, boy, I knew my job was to provide for my family and have them have a better experience at life than I did, but I underestimated the responsibility of this wealth. And so that really, it's unfair to not give them an idea of what your expectations are. They don't need to hear the numbers, but it would be useful to hear the plan, because that's where things get dicey.
So that's just a really wonderful, I think, illustration of this important point that these two issues, this whole idea of communication and trust and preparation really sort of being one and the same, if you will, and it takes a lot of additional effort and work. And I go back to this question as a planner on regular occasion, where I find myself asking, looking at the pie chart again and thinking about these numbers, where these traditional planning techniques, I mean, are they really responsible? Is it these people like me who are out there, trying to put these plans together, not looking at these other aspects that are responsible for this additional 15%? Or is there something more at play? And I sort of know the answer already, and I have another graphic keyed up again. It's the same one we looked at, but I wonder if you'd talk to us a little bit about this, because this was probably one of the more surprising aspects to me. I thought you probably could have pointed the finger at folks like me back in my former life a lot more often. So could you talk to us a little bit about this difference with, tax and financial, legal, accounting, planning, as opposed to sort of what's there, and showing this real important difference with mission?
Yeah. Without a shared mission, there's no North Star for making decisions. And so without alignment on what the purpose of the wealth is, everybody's rowing in different directions. I remember speaking with a woman who had attended a conference, and at the conference they were talking about philanthropy, and she said our family gives in 180 different directions, and she felt like it was all about the money, that they were losing an opportunity to have a deeper sense of impact and purpose. We worked with a family where there was a brother and a sister, and the brother was deeply committed to a lot of religious causes. His lifestyle was as a fisherman. He lived very simply. While he was grateful for the wealth, he really didn't want to utilize it. He wanted to be his own man. And then his sister worked for a nonprofit, and her commitment was to the gay and lesbian community and running a suicide hotline for them. She was an atheist. So they had very different values. And so you look at that and you say, wow, how could they possibly come together? Well, one of the things that we teach is that conflict can be generative. While they had two different perspectives on how to add value, they created a family wealth mission statement that said, the purpose of our wealth is to enable self-expression and make the world a better place. So when they got to a place that they could respect each other's direction and see that it was making the world a better place, and that fundamentally it was about being good human beings, they could really support each other. So that's a perfect example of where we had two different values, even within the same generation. But when they got into it, they could see really, no, this is extremely powerful. So, yep, the mission statement is essential in our world.
And Joel, I'd ask you both, really. Joel, I'll ask you first, if you could sort of comment to whether, as you look at these three largest categories, then that this sort of comes back to something you all mentioned in the beginning, and that is this much greater focus on unity than probably gets paid in terms of the overall planning process. Do you think that's a factor in this set of the three largest shares of the pie here, that if unity is a focus, that'll make a difference in terms of the success or failure of the planning that gets done?
I think it has a large impact on it. You might notice that I'm a strong believer in communication and being able to communicate. And I think the unity of family, and I look back at almost all of our families, and I know with all the families I've done with Amy, is the first 2 or 3 meetings have nothing to do with taxes and wealth and money.
Good.
It is, how do we talk? There was a family, very wealthy family. The dad passed away unexpectedly, left a bundle of coconuts for the kids. The brother took over the family office and grew the wealth like crazy, brilliant guy. The daughter was her daddy's best friend, little daughter, and she was only getting a large 3.5 million a year in passive income from her side of the trust. But they came to a family meeting because their mother said they can't talk to each other. And we were in the meeting, and they could barely look at each other. And I asked the daughter, I said, how do you understand? How do you learn something? And she says, well, I like to learn by pictures. And I said, oh, that's great. And I asked her brother, can you stand up and draw the diagram of show your sister where how this flows so she can trust you? And he did, and it was like that little shift like that happened. And I think in those first meetings, it's more about the family starting to find new ways to engage with each other rather than trying to figure out what we do with the wealth, because they, you know, they just need to have time to take a breath and go, "Phew." Now as a family and as a team, you know, we always mention, well, what would your family look like if it was a team sport? What positions would you play? And what is the goal line? And all of a sudden they start, so, well, I'd play the end and I'd play the quarterback. And everybody in the design of that starts to fall. The conversations that are needed to build the trust falls into place like that.
That
So-
really does seem to lead to this idea that we wanted to talk about of what are successful families doing to minimize those failure factors we reviewed. And so it sounds like to me, Joel, that you're identifying right there some of the techniques that families are using to get beyond that failure rate and to go further forward.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Mike, that families call Amy and I all the time and say, listen, you know, we haven't seen you in 6 or 7 years. My daughter's had a grandchild, another one's got a new job. Can we have a family meeting just a day to catch up? Like that. And I think the successful family transition is they see the importance of the work that the Williams Group does and that what is accomplished in them, and look at it as a resource. I don't know how many times we get a call out of so-and-so and Joel, I just wanted to check, and this is happening, can we have a conversation? So I truly believe that it's the family, and that's what I think the Williams Group promise is, and I know it's mine and Amy's for sure, is that we will do our best to be in service of the vision of the family as long as we're around. And our phone is always available. And I think that lets the family see the importance of it and lets them keep moving forward rather than finding a bump in the road.
Well, I'd like to say that you guys just are so perfect at teeing up these sort of next parts of the conversation, because as you mentioned this, I really do want to go back to this idea, the importance of this massive failure percentage at 10% being related to mission and vision. It strikes me that I never once had a family come into my office and sit down with me as we started to work on their estate plans with respect to either their businesses, long-term, the multi-generational aspects, where there was ever a discussion of a family mission or estate plan. And so I'd like to ask you both, how can you see this, this family mission and vision statement really advising the advisors, making sure that they have the guidance they need to really properly serve these families and heirs?
What I hear often from advisors is that a family gets stuck in perpetual planning, that they can't quite make a decision. And the reason they can't make a decision is usually because there's some breakdown in trust and communication. So what advisors can do is bring in experts to help that family move through the conversation. If the advisor themselves can't do it, or if they feel that that's a little over their skis, to deal with the underlying, what we call pending conversations first. So those conversations might be, oh, maybe one daughter is designated as having the medical power of attorney, but it turns out that she really is terrified by that role and doesn't want it just because she's the oldest one, but she's not sure how to speak truth to power. And in her mind, power is the advisor, or power is mom and dad. So you might need to deal with some of those pending conversations first, however they can do that. But the mission statement is the marching orders for the advisor. It does tell them, okay, this is in line, this isn't in line. Or it also helps them build more relationship with the next generation, because they're the ones saying to the next generation, hey, what do you see as the purpose of this wealth? So that your actions as an advisor are in alignment. It's important to mention here that alignment doesn't necessarily equal agreement. So it's possible that mom and dad could have their own estate plan. It might be that the next generation doesn't agree with it, but the question becomes, do they feel heard in their contribution of how that estate plan is going to affect their lives? And can they live with it? Because you want to have that conversation while you're this side of the daisies. When you're on the other side of those days, it's a lot harder to have that conversation. So Ouija boards, they go only so far. So, so I think the mission statement is what the advisor can use to carry on the family legacy. Most
If
definitely.
I could just add a quickie about the mission statement. It's really a great design. I think we've all gone through a mission statement process, but this is where we talk about the 5 areas of life. And it's a family unity process because everybody says what their value is with regards to finances, regards to physical, right? All of this. And we have graphics recorders drawing all of this up. And so when they get along on the missions exercise or process, pretty soon they discover that they all have their values are fairly similar. And so why don't we move with that? And then out of another part of the process, they co-design and co-write the family mission statement. So it's not the father or mother sending it down through an email. It's like a co-generative phenomena. And then they stand up at the end of the day reading the mission statement and say, I can live with that. And away they go. And then everything is built around that.
I want to
So-
say one other thing on this, Mark.
Mhm.
Very often in most families, there are values that are there, and the mission statement is based on values, but the values may not be articulated. They're just, again, assumed. We worked with a family where there was 4 brothers in business together, and they were thinking about how we're going to bring the next generation into the business. Well, they all thought, the brothers thought, well, we started pushing a broom. Let's put a broom in their hand and have them clean up the job sites. So one of the next gen who had just graduated NYU Stern School said, wait a minute, I can run this company with my cell phone, and you want to put a broom in my hand? And they said, yeah, you bet. We're going to put a broom in your hand, especially after that comment, because the idea was that we would learn from the ground up, rub elbows with the people that made that business successful, and really get a sense of the amount of work it takes to have this business be successful. So it wasn't about money in that instance or growing the business. It was, let's live, let's experience the family value here. Yeah, that can still be
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Joel, as we're sort of moving on, I know we're kind of getting into the topic area right now, but, and Amy, for you too, I know this is 2 questions on the screen, but I'll sort of ask it as one, and that is really, so as families are looking at their plans, as they're trying to put all of this together, what can they do so that they're not just talking about transferring property or assets successfully? And more importantly, for the families and the heirs, what can they do so that they make sure that this is a force for good in their lives, not a burden, but even for successive generations? Because it seems to me, given all the discussion about planning today, that this needs to be something that is approached with commitment from all the generations.
Amy, you want to go take that on, or?
Yeah, sure. So what they can do is not focus on the assets. The biggest thing they can do is focus on who the family members are being for each other, right? We were working with a family not long ago where the mom really ran the show. She grew the business and she pulled all the strings and she was really the one in charge. And she got to a point where she just wanted to be a mom. She wanted a different kind of relationship with the kids. So that was really a very different kind of relationship. It wasn't about the assets or who was going to step into the business. Those would be normal conversations. But really, she was inviting a different kind of relationship that she wanted to have with her girls. So the biggest thing that families can do is really help the next generation build their own sense of purpose. What's important to them individually. And it may or may not be joining the family business. I think that's one piece. The other one is, I'll take a page out of George Steinbrenner's book where he would lift the sides of tents and he would say, let the young elephants in early. The other thing that I hear from the next gen is that they want more runway with their mom or their dad to learn how to think and be wealthy in a responsible way. So start the conversations early. Like Joel said, he's working with somebody who's 6, his family has a 6-year-old. We find that kids in their 20s are probably the best age because that's when they're starting to turn towards the world and having to interface and be responsible for their own identity. So I would say focus on who they can see their kids being, who they're becoming. And secondly, I would focus on preparing them with more runway so they can see their parents more than just people who provide a certain lifestyle, but to tap their genius.
I would do all of that, as well as when have annual meetings or something where there's a tradition that the families all get together. And I think it's an opportunity for families to come and share what they're up to, how they're using the resources that the families has provided them in making a contribution. And that pretty powerful set of conversations.
Yeah.
Fabulous, you guys. And this really brings me, unfortunately, as we're coming close to the end here, I'm going to have to jump over some of the additional suggested techniques that are mentioned in the Preparing Heirs book. But I'll say to all of you who are out there, if you're interested in this further, I think you should definitely check out the book. But if I might ask for your parting comments about what future heirs should be doing to prepare themselves for this responsibility and the benefits of an inheritance, I think that would be our best place to probably leave it.
You want to kick us off, Joel?
No. No, why don't you?
I'll be happy to. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. So I think the best thing the next generation can do is insist on family meetings. They need to keep saying to mom and dad, hey, what's the plan? They need to not be shy about speaking truth to power and saying, what's the plan? I don't need to know numbers, but it would be helpful to know so that when and if that time comes, which we can't anticipate, I'm not here overwhelmed with not knowing which way to turn. So keep knocking on the door and saying, what do I need to know? Questions like, what are the expectations of me? Questions like, what does prepared look like? You could ask to meet with the advisors. I think that's an excellent idea, with your mom and dad, and say, hey, let's at least have a conversation here about what my role is in all of this.
Yeah.
I think that's a good start.
But you can have the younger generations ask their parents, what do they see their role should look like that would make them happy?
A wonderful question, Joel. I could tell you, I probably should be asking my parents that somewhere along the way.
Thank you. Well, my last thing is jump in. The water's fine. We've had great family meetings, and just over the years, the difference they've made to the well-being of our country and health and education is astounding. So we'd love to swim with you.
Thank you both so much.
Let me jump in for just a moment and wrap this up. Amy, you did today what I thought was quite impossible. You were even better today than you were 48 hours ago.
It must be the haircut, Barry.
It could
Very
be the
nice.
haircut. It could be Joel. It could be Mark. It could be all three of you, which of course it is. You have just provided the meatiest hour, I think, of any of the webinars we have done to date. My thanks to all three of you, heartfelt thanks. On behalf of the Carter Center, for those of you who have been part of our extended family, thank you. I certainly hope all of you remain healthy and safe. And one last time, Amy, Joel, thank you very, very much for all you have done to make this a great success. If you have questions for either of them, or for me, or for Mark, you will find the last slide of our PowerPoint is our business cards. Click on it, you will go straight to our emails. With that, I wish you all Godspeed. God bless.